and welcome to my review on Poltergeist 2, guys. Here we have our first character we're introduced to in the sequel, which picks up about a year or two after the events of the first film, and it's Taylor, played by Will Sampson, who, by the way, is a real honest-to-God Native American shaman, so pretty cool. And he did actually do some stuff for the movie besides that. His presence is one of the best in the movie, and as one of the new characters, he really does, I don't know, give us this experience, and he shows off a lot of who he is. I think it helps the movie out considerably in more than one. The opening sequence here really does show Taylor accepting this quest to deal with the poltergeist and to help the Freeling. He's here meeting with one of the elders. I don't know if he's alive or dead, but it's pretty important that a lot of things are happening. This is where Taylor gets his spiritual help and a guide, as well as what he calls the smoke warriors. Well, at least that's what I call them. He just calls it the smoke will guide you kind of stuff. And it works very well. It's also a great visual effects sequence. I want you guys to see this movie, so I'm trying to limit what I show, but enough to whet your appetite. I also want to point out that this is a Screen Factory and Scream Factory collector's edition, which means this has been very effectively restored. And it looks great. It may be a Blu-ray version, but as you can see, even with this limited quality, they've really restored the film to almost better than what it looks like when it was in theaters. And I saw this in theaters, in the drive-thru when I was a kid, so that should tell you how old it is. And it actually holds up pretty well. The great DTS Mastered 5.1 soundtrack is also fantastic to hear as well. It will give you goosebumps. And the score by Jerry Goldsmith, which continues from the first film, not only continues many of those same themes, but it introduces new ones for some of our new characters, and it gives us these great bombastic pieces that are just fantastic. And this sequence shows off the new elements in the score, the characters. It has great cinematography. It's a whole wonderful setup to this film, and it just whets your appetite for more. And from this, we go into almost a completely different setup. And I have to say is one of the best that I absolutely love in these movies. Another great factor to this movie is that it lets us see, as he's heading to, the former house, he lets us see just what's become of Cuesta Verde. And as you can see, it starts out becoming very almost abandoned, decayed almost. While there's still some life in a few places, we get to see just how serious the events after the Freelings left has become. It's almost to a small point like a demilitarized zone, for crying out loud. And this is really set upon later on in the sequence. It's not very long, but it tells us so much with just everything down to the look and decay of everything that's around it. I mean, there aren't many movies that actually get to do this, and we got to see what 1 or 2 years has done to this neighborhood. And I would personally, if I was them, not want to live here either. I mean, look at this. This is like just, wow. This looks like almost an abandoned neighborhood. It almost looks like you're going into Silent Hill. And it's a great sequence. It just continues to build. And all throughout this time, Taylor is having these visions of what transpired that night. And take a look here. This is from the first movie. This is, seeing what happened to the house. And as you'll notice, there's a lot of detail here that they actually do recreate. I just can't find any fault here. It's still amazing. And the fact that they were able to do this kind of detail is absolutely amazing. I mean, look at that. So much of what was there is technically still there. I mean, you can definitely tell it's been more, I would almost say, destroyed after the events of that night, but it tells us a lot. The decay has just been allowed to spread. And the duress, basically duressing this entire section that they probably built, is just so amazing, especially when you consider there's no house there anymore. And it works so good. I mean, that's really great detail. Even take a look at the bricks, too. The coloring is still there. They're extremely faded in some cases, but they're there. even down to how you have the red sort of bricks and then you have the, I would almost say white ones. It actually does a very good job showing off that there was some serious forethought here. And I gotta be fair, it makes this movie more relatable. It actually does feel like you went from one film to the next film, and even how you did that in terms of making them. Just it was all planned. And I think in a weird sense that does actually help this movie out considerably. And of course, Tangina comes right back. And I gotta say, she is one of the best characters to bring back. She's also not in just like one sequence. She's in multiple sequences of this movie. She's really well, sort of, I would almost say, planned out and, brought out through so much of the film. And it's done so well. And the actress who plays her is just really great here. Her and Taylor know each other, and it's pretty clear that there's a lot going on. They're also heading down into this cave that was directly under the Freeling house and the old cemetery. So you don't just have an old cemetery, you have a damn crypt under your house too. Like, let's just add all the problems. And it's one of the best sequences. Plus, there's a little trivia about the crypt. Oh, this part will give some people nightmares. Not to mention just the sheer detail in the cave. Already you can see things like candles, and in a couple of other sequences you could just make out like cave drawings and stuff, telling us how old this cave is. And I mean, the fact that you have an old candle there in this flashlight and that they're always moving around illuminating the set is so impressive. And just like a real cave, it's got moisture and all kinds of other things. It's actually kind of creepy, and it works so well for this movie. It just brings everything into focus. And even on Tangina's face, you can see the fear. And look there, again, more wax. You can see the rock, almost like it's been even chipped away a little bit. This is definitely not a place the living are supposed to be, and yet here they are because something has gotten their attention. This is just the beginning of the film, and it already has so much going on, setting up with so many characters and setting up the events. It's one of those great openings in movies, and it's not a joke. And of course, this just foreshadows what's going to happen at the end of the film. And I got a feeling this set was used very well. And look at this. I mean, all of these bodies, that's just creepy, especially that one central one that's almost sitting like it's proceeding over all of them. That's pretty creepy. And of course, here's where some trivia comes in and why Will Sampson actually did some kind of write on the show. It may be a little shocking, but a lot of those corpses are actually real. I'm not kidding. Many of those bodies in this sequence are real. Even I would be concerned, being the actors on set, like, wait, what? You want me to literally walk over a dead guy? Holy, yeah. I mean, that's pretty terrifying when you stop and you think about it. Oh, and then there's this one. Okay, we're moving on. And almost 10 minutes in, we finally get to the Freeling family, which is pretty impressive. We get introduced to all the members of the family. The only one who's not present is the older daughter, Dana. And it's actually mentioned in the book that she's off to college. Unfortunately, in real life, the real actress was killed by her boyfriend. Uh, the beep that happens. However, I have to say that it does show the family is moving on. They're having fun. And Grandma was mentioned in the original film. We didn't see her, but she was mentioned. So she's kind of both a returning new character, kind of like how a certain other character will be a little bit later on in this review. What I love is that we actually get to see that although the family is not having the best of times, they are making do with whatever they've got. They're happy, they're together, the family's, working out. And this scene also does a good job showing the family doing that stuff. But then it also shows them, in their unit. But then it shows Diane, her mother, and Carol Ann having these abilities. It's less with Diane, but more with Grandma and Carol Ann. And it works so well. And it's just a little tiny scene, and you see the grandmother recognizing these signs, and it's such a great scene. And yet, it's only this small little sequence. After this, we see the family is trying to adjust to everything. They're still trying to get the insurance to cover the house because it disappeared. Um, you have them still being freaked out because of the TV, so there's no TVs in the house at all. I'm pretty sure Grandma didn't like that, but hey. And at the same time, Grandma is, as the film progresses, while she's still in it, because spoiler, she does die, but it's kind of not a big deal because Kane doesn't show up to attack, and you'll find out who Kane is soon until after Grandma's gone. So Grandma clearly was a badass, and let's be fair, you know, it's one of those things. It's rare, but when it happens, it happens. And it actually makes the film so incredibly different from many others, and I absolutely love that. And then we get introduced to our primary villain of the piece, Reverend Henry Kane. This guy becomes known as the Beast, played by, unfortunately, in his last role, actor Julian Beck. There's also another little story connected to this guy. He was apparently H.R. Giger's favorite actor. At least that's what I've heard. And was one of the little sweet spots for Giger to come and help with this film. He did some of the concept art for some of the creatures and stuff. And believe it or not, many of what he did actually does make it into the film. And unlike some movies, he was actually not that big of a downer on this one. I think it's also because he was an artist. But, you know, he knows Hollywood's got to make this stuff work, and sometimes that's not so easy. And Beck was one of his people. And by the way, what Giger did for this movie was absolutely brilliant, and yet it did not feel like it totally took away from the original film. So there's still good continuity and good design work there with his work. And in the case of Beck here, it actually becomes even better. Beck himself was unfortunately dying of stomach cancer during the shooting of this film. So unfortunately, when we watch this movie, we're watching an actor who is literally wasting away in front of the camera. And I can't even begin to imagine what this poor man was feeling. I'm pretty sure he was in pain a lot, and yet he delivers such an incredible performance and is literally one of the best movie villains. And I'm going to say this right now about Poltergeist 3. It was a stupid attempt to recreate this character without this actor. There are some roles you just cannot replace. And here's one of your reasons. This man literally looks like death worn over because, unfortunately, death was knocking on his door. Not me, it was somebody else. I was still a kid at the time. Needless to say, he delivers one of those rare performances of a lifetime. And oh, dear God, is he spooky as hell. What he brings to the role of the Beast just works so well. And again, this is a returning character, and one that's, in all fairness, fleshed out. Now, you'll notice a few things. Check out his hat, his clothing. This actually fits in with one of the sequences from the first movie. It's one of the reasons I say it's almost like they were planned, and I don't know if they were, but you know, he's got this sort of like old preacher's outfit, kind of like something you see in the Old West, and it works so well, not only giving him this creepy look, but really designing this emblem of him. And he's a preacher, for crying out loud. They're not supposed to be evil, and yet this guy is manipulative. I can't even say the word right. Cunning. He's a liar, and he's somebody who gets into your head. This is one of those rare villains that he doesn't even need to become like a wisp of smoke or a phantom in the shadows or even a giant monster. He can just talk to you. Just talk. That can be even more terrifying. You're like, oh, it's boring, but when you actually see this guy doing this stuff, it's terrifying. And in this sequence with Carol Ann, he can't take her, but he can still interact with her. He's trying to, you know, befriend her. And he's actually trying to look innocent and happy. He's smiling. and it's just incredibly creepy. And then he starts singing this song, which, to be fair, if it wasn't in this movie, it probably wouldn't be that creepy of a song. But with both the way this guy sings it and also the times it's added with Jerry Goldsmith's score, it's absolutely terrifying. I mean, it's done so well. And it also shows Jerry Goldsmith's unique chops. This movie let him do new scores into the film to fit this particular chapter, and it works so incredibly well. There aren't many movies that can do that. And this one works so well, and it gives him that presence. And he's always, the camera's on him and Carol Ann, and then of course Diane, she comes with Robbie to find him, Carol Ann, and he's like such a lovely child, and he's terrifying. And of course, there's the ghost things that only Carol Ann can see, like people walking through him, for crying out loud. How terrifying do you need to make a sequence in order to understand? And this is still so early in the film, and we haven't even gotten into the real insanity, or when, of course, they just go all out and And of course, then after all of the events, the family managing to escape, getting contacted by Grandma after she's passed, and then meeting Taylor here, everything just starts to fall in. Basically, Taylor tells them that no matter what they do, he's going to find them, the beast. And they are in that kind of trouble. He's offering his help. And I do understand Stephen, like, no, even when he's told, Tangina sent me, he's like, definitely no. And I do understand most people who have been in these situations, the last thing they want to do is get right back into the same setup. And I totally understand. And for this family, it just basically becomes even worse. But Taylor, he proves to be helpful. There is, however, this running gag through the film with the car, and it does help with some of the tension. I'm going to say that right now. But and Taylor as well. But I got to give them credit here. It helps set up. And it also tells us that, with the way things are going, the beast can't always be there. There are going to be some times of peace, but the problem is you never know when the trouble is coming. And this creates great moments of suspense and trying to figure out what's going to happen. And this actually does help this movie. It's not just a rehash of the original. It actually does have these great moments where you have to realize, what do we do? How do we fight this? What's going to be the final battle? And that makes the movie better. Be silent now, while and his presence now. Like I said, his singing, that song and the score just make it creepy. And this scene, having rain with no clouds visible overhead, is another little shock, if you will. And it does a great job setting up the character and also him trying to constantly get closer and closer to the family. Ultimately resulting in him and Steven having this this confrontation. And he's always so nice and pleasant and manipulative. It works great. This sequence really shows his manipulative and, again, like I said, the ability to talk and how dangerous it can be. Look at him. He is literally just being nice. He's smiling. He's not being overly threatening, and yet he's able to create this tension that doesn't exist. And we see how it starts to slowly change. He talks about Taylor. It's pretty clear there's some history between his spirit or his group and Taylor's family line. We don't know what it is, but we do know it's something serious. And of course, this scene continues with Steve going into the house, and then it becomes part of them just talking through the screen. It's impressive. And the camera work always goes closer and closer until the moment we see it on their eyes. And making the scene even worse, you have Diane seeing these visions. Her abilities making themselves known to her. And it's terrifying. I mean, look at that. It's not just, the rainwater that's on her, it's also sweat. She's perspirating. She's experiencing these things. I can only imagine what this must feel like. And frankly, I don't want to. But it does all of these great things. And it feels like a general progression from the first film. And yet, all of this happening while Kane is there. The guy is that powerful. And again, that look, those feelings. And, the fact at one point he almost seems to be succeeding. He's even like, I'm your friend. I'm smart. And I know what you're thinking. Like I said, a screen door. That's all there is between them. And yet he's becoming closer. He looks more dead now. And yet this is a real person. Think about it. There's a screen door, and yet you are still terrified. You're scared he's going to come right through the damn thing. How do you fight something like this? That is what makes it so incredibly dangerous. And like I said, it builds and builds and builds. And that can make a great film, especially with ghost movies. And again, closer on him and closer, clearly showing more. And Stephen being terrified and bewildered and actually nodding like, I'll let you in, like he's being hypnotized. And you can actually see the fear in his face. I mean, he even looks like he's getting sick. This is nothing normal. And like I said, right there, this is great camera work. It sells this image. And imagine seeing this up on the big screen, for crying out loud. And it's both of them. And it's ultimately Carol Ann's voice that brings him back to his senses. And Kane, he then becomes so aggressive, literally saying, you're all going to die. And it just continues to make the scene terrifying. And even when he fails, the way he leaves is like, you should have let me in. That's when you realize you have a more terrifying villain than you want. And then ultimately having him walk away and fade out of existence. It's so terrifying, and it's so classic Ghost. And, it's pretty intense. I mean, how can you not like this? And then ultimately Taylor coming out and basically confirming that, that was the beast. That was your big baddie. And everything that's going to continue on from that point. The film really does start to build from this one moment forward, and it gets pretty good. You have certain sequences and stuff. And again, if I try to show more, it would be just giving away so much of this movie because of everything that happens. This is one of the best sequences, and yet we still haven't even seen the full extent. And remember, I'm only showing you up to a point. You really should. Now, Taylor here, he does tell Stephen basically, you just had one hell of an encounter and he'll be back. That's the beast. That's Reverend Henry Kane, and that's what you're facing. And of course he does. And when he does, he tries to separate the family, and he succeeds up to a point, but Taylor stays and protects Carol Ann. And of course, after this, Taylor has to keep preparing them. He knows that there's no other way but to go back to Cuesta Verde. He warns them. And we also get this from Tangina, who also determines that Diane can see things. And it just keeps building the story up. And, you begin to realize how serious this is. Taylor gives Stephen a bit of help through the smoke, one of the spirits. And, you get this great experience with that. And eventually the final night occurs where they are in this house, and where, the beast, he's basically had enough. He's tired of waiting. He wants the girl. And he, in a sense, forces the final confrontation. And this works so well for the film because it really does tell us that everything builds to going back to Cuesta Verde. And, it's not a small deal. And I love it so much. It does a great job working for this film The cinematography is great. The soundtrack is great. And I even found a special version of the soundtrack on vinyl recently and picked it up. It wasn't cheap, but it still sounds incredible. I wish all the songs from the movie are there, but they're not. But what is here is nothing short of amazing. The character actors, the environment, everything that happens, every little nuance, and the work from the visual effects team is just amazing. This film is easily one of the best out there, and I do highly recommend it. And I'm not kidding when I say this. You need to see this movie. I'm lucky enough to get it in this regard. I don't know if the collector's editions are still available or not, which kind of sucks. But hey, you deal with what you can. I highly recommend the film. Like and subscribe, hit all the bells, and happy Halloween, guys. I'll be seeing you later.